In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. It is Wednesday, so we get to dive into guest interviews in the off season, which again is going to be exceptionally fun over the course of this season. We talked to our friend Kelly last week about tennis. That ended up being a fantastic conversation. And this one today that you will be listening to is one that I've been looking forward to for a long time. We have an industry insider, a former trader, a guy that understands the global sports betting marketplace better than anyone I've ever talked to. And we are going to have a fascinating conversation. Welcome to the deep dive for the first time ever, Mr. Matthew Trenhaile. How are you doing this evening?
Thank you very much. Doing very well. Absolute pleasure to be on. I feel very honored. Hopefully I can share some knowledge that may be useful to some of the listeners. Maybe not, but we'll see how we go.
Okay, so now...
we talked a little off there about that. I mean, and hopefully you can enlighten some people with some of your, stories, knowledge, anecdotes, thoughts about the markets. That's something we've had trouble explaining for a couple of years, I think. And it's been, we do an NFL podcast. We talk about a bunch about the league, what's going on and stuff. But, we haven't got too far off of just market entry, and understanding where some of these lines originate. I don't know if we've even gotten really deep into that ever. Where these lines originated. I think some people that follow along to the NFL have started to understand, like, those Sunday openers that you guys were betting, because originally we were doing a podcast on Sunday night. We were picking off some Sunday openers, and then we'd release that podcast, and some people would listen to it Monday and be like, well, I can't bet any of these. They've moved. and it forced us to, we'll do it live then. We'll do a live stream on Sunday in case people want to join us, pick off some of these low limit openers, and some people have enjoyed that. But I think, a side part of that has been some people are kind of understanding how the NFL market progresses throughout the week as, just a side effect of that. So I think that's important as you progress. As I started with college basketball and, I wasn't betting very much. It didn't matter. Like, market entry was easy. I could hit really soft openers because I wasn't betting very much money, and it didn't matter. I could hit the softest of openers, and that was a big progression. I had to learn, like, how this market moves and where it opens at certain places and how I can enter if you did want to. Once you scale, anytime you try to scale, you do need to understand the market quite a bit more. So hopefully you can enlighten everybody here. And I don't know if you want to just start with some background and tell people.
Well, talking about the openers, you just want to find the right table to sit down at, right? If at the opening line you sat down at the $2 table, you look around at there's the really drunk guy next to you. There's the guy who's never played before to your right. You're like, oh, $2. This is it. $2 table's me right now. Like, this is going to be easy, And then it turns out when you go to the $5 table, $10 table, as the market evolves, it's like, oh, this guy actually seems like he might know what he's doing. And because I think, just observing who the market participants are and I was about to say their agenda. It's not their agenda, but why they're doing what they do and how they make money doing it, whether it's, guys placing bets or operators, knowing what you're entering into at a given time in the market, like evolution, I think has real value. I think, for a long time, I didn't put any thought really into anything. Like, I started out as a trader and making odds, for the sports that I was looking after. And I would just think about my process and what I was doing and how I would come up with the odds. And the only time you really thought about the mechanics of the market, I suppose, is I would look, put my odds up, look at the other people in the market, be like, oh shit, I'm really out on that game, or I'm sort of in line with that game. And, and then I would sort of try to think, how's that person come up with that? But then it's like, you're like, oh, maybe I missed this or that, and tweak it. And then, just let people place bets and see where we go. But then the more you kind of work in like sort of all global aspect of the industry, you're kind of like, oh, there's a lot of interconnecting pieces to the puzzle, I guess. And yeah, market origination, like some of it's, I think, some of it proves to be quite like, oh, it's a bit mundane, really. You know, it's like, you know, if someone said to you, you know, offshore bookmaker A, as the NFL games are finishing, is just updating fairly old school power ranking, knows at the end of the day that limits go up low, limits finish high at the other end, can average into whatever position you need to average into. You know, it's just like, look, does it matter what number I throw out right now? You're kind of like, you know, what? You mean they're not plugging it into the supercomputer? And like, you know, maybe not. But, you know, there's definitely, you know, really solid established markets. The closing lines of the sports pretty much dictate the power ranking update, barring injuries and things you've observed.
Of course.
And situationals, like maybe next week is the last week of the season or whatever, so no one gives a shit, whatever it is. But barring like the injuries and the situationals, it's kind of like the origination of that is like, it's, you know, it's nice to know where it's nice to know where the first number was hung, but again, it's just sort of more of a curiosity thing. But the ones that I like, so brand new sports, you know, when they come along, like that's interesting. And, you know, sports have suddenly become much more popular and they can sort of change, as in someone suddenly decides, do you know what, I'm going to get involved with the origination of that because I think I can do it better. So like there's not many originators around the world. However, there are different sets of originators for different sports to a degree, regional differentials, you know, and then you get, I mean, the example I always give is bandy, which is like a crazy Scandinavian kind of hockey, you know, like Bet365 does not hang the first bandy number, and they're probably right not to, you know, but if it's say like Vikhaus, which is like the Finnish national bookmaker, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's definitely in their interest to hang that early. Sure. And they'll take business, and you know they've got retail outlets with to place bets and you know all the rest of it. So you know it makes sense, and you can sort of see the little pockets of origination that sort of create enough interest. Because a lot of people do just say to me like, yeah, doesn't everyone just wait till Bet365 goes up with a number, and then that's the number for everyone? Or in the case of US facing stuff like Chris posts, like, do you know what? The one thing I like about the American market is it does sort of, it's sort of constantly evolving, because when you've got a limited number of sports to really hyper focus on,
sure,
like Circa have been first to market for some college sports, I want to say,
sure, yeah, quite
a bit, and that's something that just didn't exist maybe a couple of years ago. And you're like, the one I always love is like this one always amuses me, is that I always see it on the screens that I used to look at. I always see it as Bet Royal, right? Now Bet Royal's been dead. I bet some of the money mover guys offshore would tell me like Bet Royal is a website you go to that tells you it's closed down, and I think it was bought by maybe SBG Europe or something like that, and that's probably been closed down. It's probably owned by someone else offshore, you know, like that. But the funny thing is that the website of Bet Royal is still kept alive, and it still updates numbers. And for a long time on college football, the first place you could find anywhere in the world for college football to go up with a line was this Bet Royal website. And you're like, my God, what the fuck's going on there? And the great thing is then after that, the second person to go up was often NicaBet. And NicaBet is a label of 5 dimes. Yeah, so that okay. Island Casino, 5 dimes kind of thing like that. Sure. And so you're like, you know, and I just would think like, what on earth is the interest? Like, I think of Bet Royal, and I don't know anything about Bet Royal or what they used to be like before they were closed. But I'm guessing they were the kind of people that would be happily taking, you know, $500, $1,000 bets, like at tip-off. Not the people who are like, because now Circa hangs a number in like 10,000 or whatever it is, you know, bold plays they make, and you're like, There's no way that Bet Royal were doing that back in the day. Or who knows? Maybe they were doing that, and that's why Bet Royal doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
But, that sort of crazy little window of origination, and like WNBA. Who goes up with first with WNBA? And I always was brought up as I was a trader that there was no place for heroes, was the phrase. Don't feel you have to go up first. However, the US market, there's definitely, would you say there's a prestige to being first up almost for operators now?
For sure. Circa is often, given some pats on the back and, lauded by bettors is like, hey, because it takes some balls to put up some of those numbers. And, they're not just taking nickel limits. They are taking some decent limits on, especially for an opener on some of those numbers. And they're not using other numbers. They're using their in-house traders and setting their own numbers. Their college numbers are often a little off market. And maybe we find out in the long run that they were off market in the right way and everybody else was truly off market. They were on market. But even their Twitter account, well, I think it was, I don't know if they did this last year, but the year before for sure. They just hung their power numbers. Here's our power numbers for college football on the top 25. This is how we'd rate these teams relative to each other, which was something. So I think there is a bit of prestige, but like you said, like if I were an operator, I'd want to be like third. I'd want to let somebody else take the arrow. Like you stand in front of me, take the arrows, I'll run into battle.
But there's an advantage to being first too, because we know as sports bettors, you get into a rhythm, a system, right? Like I do my NBA at the same time every night because I know when I'm going to see numbers, I know where I'm going to see them, and that becomes part of my process, right? And for sure, if you are drawing in the people who are repeatably trying to be first to market with their information for whatever reason, then and you get their bets, then you are, yes, if you're not taking those bets, you'll see how the line moves and you're getting the output of the odds makers synthesis of the data that they've collected, from the early bettors, but you don't actually have those bets. You don't actually know those customers. You don't actually understand necessarily whose action is influencing that movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What stops me DMing you, Drew, though, and going like, look, I'm going to post these as soon as you've placed your bets with me. Here's the private numbers.
Sure.
You bet into them. We know offshore does. To be honest, offshore is probably one of the few places that still does it.
That happens.
Go way back in the UK, horse racing, there used to be a group of people who were allowed first bet before the actual numbers were posted. We'd have people who'd come up with what they call tissues. So they come up with prices and you pay people who provided this service, because, horse racing is challenging to price, right? So they'd have these super experts and they'd send in the tissues, fax machine, and when I first started. And it was almost like if you have a couple of tissues and average the prices,
yeah,
you got somewhere. Call up a guy, have you got anything you want to bet today? The guy will already know the kind of horse he thinks will be too big. So he'll go through like a few horses. Like he almost doesn't need to see the prices because he kind of already knows the market rates this kind of thing. It doesn't rate this kind of thing. So he then goes to the horses, usual conversation. Can I have 5 million on that? Well, you can have 500. Okay, I'll take it. It's like just usual bullshit. And, you get to the right price and then you send those numbers out. And there's sort of this thing where you can there's only enough meat to keep so many people full. Because if you do that with the first guy, the smart guy calls up, and then you've got the next guy, and he's like, oh, these numbers seem a bit sharp. I don't know if I want to bet any of these. So yes, and the great thing is that what you almost wanted was you wanted two tissues from two different services, maybe. And then you wanted to call the guy who was like, I don't know, the guy with the stopwatch at the track. So the Bayer speed figures, that guy. And then you wanted to call the other guy who's like ex-jockey, speaks to all the trainers. Like his viewpoint is just worlds away.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there's meat for him, because he almost likes to bet against stopwatch guy, and there's meat for stopwatch guy because he loves betting against the guy who thinks the horse looks in good shape or whatever.
Man.
And then we kind of get to this nice thing, and that is 100% dying, and it's stupid to kill it. Absolutely. But yeah, so like I'm DMing you, Drew, and the thing is now I've got to figure out a way to, what's your sweet spot?
Sure.
Do I need to give you a dime, 2 dimes? How much do I need to give Drew on the opening lines to get him invested? And not just invested, but like so. And then I've got another guy who I kind of want his view as well because Drew's good, but I kind of need Andy's as well because Andy's like a different style. Andy's the guy who like goes to spring training or whatever and watches them, and like Drew's the numbers guy or whatever. And there's got to be you constantly get people, you've got to share the pie out to keep them all interested. And that is a challenge. And also, while you're doing this, you've got to be watching for when Drew sorry, Drew, you're kind of losing it. I think maybe your edge is gone, or like, and so then like Drew's calling up, and suddenly Drew realizes that he's bet 5 games with you, and then when the lines are posted, they've moved it the opposite direction. It's like,
or you've raised his limits. We can give you 5 dimes.
We really appreciate what you're doing for us. We're going to give you bigger limits. Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And it makes me think about. I can't think of the fella's name, but it was someone who talked to Spanky, and I think he was with Chris. And he talked about this sort of thing with his college football, or maybe it was just NFL.
NFL maybe it's like they go through the list of 10 guys. Yeah.
But yeah, and it makes me wonder. He didn't really allude to that, but it makes me wonder. And I'm assuming it's probably very similar, where he has, some guys who bet the into the football market based on some slightly different criteria, so he gets a good composite view of, that this is probably most likely what the market in whole is going to, you get that sample of, like you said, the numbers guy, the eye test guy, the guy who does things a little different, a little more contrarian, dogs early, favorites late kind of guy. And you get a good market view just for those small group of people to set your numbers. And then when you put out your numbers to the actual market, you're probably feeling pretty good because you're going to get that same mix of people diving into the market as it starts to mature through the week.
So, I mean, as you said, I'd like to go up third. Well, I'm going up first, but I'm going up third because I've had 2 guys bet into
That's
me.
true. That's true.
So, I mean, and I read a lot about like markets outside of betting. What I found interesting was this idea that it's actually like the sort of the semi-magic tipping point is 3 opinions, 3 independent opinions makes a market, like a reasonably stable market. So 2's not enough, but 3, you're already sort of there. And if you think of this as sort of, if you're familiar with the phrase, sort of a binary search, like let's say you had a favorite, and it's like you're minus 200, and someone bets it, and like you move it, from minus 200 to minus 600, then the person backs the other way, the 600 back to halfway between the 200, 600. Like, so you go up and down, you need to do very few, like, it's like, if someone said to you, like, what's the chance it wins? I'll tell you 50%. And you said, and they said, well, I want to go higher. And you go, right, so somewhere between 150, I'll go 75, and they go lower. Okay, so now I'm 67.5. Like, it doesn't take many to get to, and all you need to do is you need to get within your VIC, right?
Right. Yeah.
You don't need to get spot on,
which shouldn't be hard considering where most people are laying juice. Yeah.
So if my first 3 bets out the gate are from people who are completely legit good, I'm already feeling good. But of course, right now, there's every chance the first 3 bets you take is some bastard moving your line 5 points the wrong way just so they can, like, whatever, I say bastard, that's the game. That's the beauty of it. But you can't now straight away. People used to hit openers, and that's the other thing is it's like people arguing, I want to hang small limits. But small limits begets market manipulation and bad info. Sure. Now, if you're someone who's like, those small limits are going to get hit, it doesn't matter if you take a lot of noise trading early. I think people fret too much, look, their line's been pulled around all over the place. How awful. And it's like, not that awful for them. You know, like if you take $500 at minus 110, you know, the closing EV, even if it ends up 4 points away, like it's just nothing. It's like, what have I paid? Like $100 in EV or something. It's just like they don't, you know, no one cares. But you know, obviously if you're up high limits, like I think that the thing is we got this situation, and it's very clear. Anyone who's tracked the betting exchanges in the UK, so particularly the Betfair exchanges, is there used to be this thing where there was horse racing markets from about 9 a.m. in the UK up until sort of midday, 1 o'clock, when the horse racing would actually start. There used to be quite strong money early in the market, and it used to grow and grow and grow, and there was massive market. We've now got to the point where there is hardly any money at all, and then in the last 15 minutes, there is massive money.
Bang, yeah.
And it's like someone figured out I can get, 90% right by paying fuck all. And it's like that was, and people moan about this, but it's like, it's just clever guys, right? You can moan about it, but someone figured out that I can
guy
get
in
the
Hong
right
Kong
price.
figured it out, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can get so far with just so little money having to exchange hands.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as long as there's new guys doing, stupid live podcasts on soft opening numbers, telling everyone where the numbers are going to move, and they don't have to pay very much. But the funny thing is that if one person goes starving, another one's feasting. So while there are people out there who are like, oh God, I can't get my Chris or Pinnacle bet on at the size I want because someone's ruined the number already. Well, there's someone who's just made good friends with a new PPH, isn't there? So someone's getting a new account, a new action somewhere, aren't they? So I wouldn't, I never, if a professional gambler's ever moaning about not being able to get on, it's the best sign in the world, because if all you can moan about is not getting on, it means you're running pretty good.
Yeah. Well,
if they're complaining about how they can't win, they definitely got a problem. But if their only complaint is I can't get the money down, that's probably of all the problems you can have, that's probably the best problem.
Yeah.
But,
it makes me think of the video we just watched, the partial fills. Like it's I'm trying to think of how to say this without sounding mean. Like it's so simple, it's stupid. Like but it was like an aha moment where when you talk about it, if anybody hasn't watched, we talked a little off air about, you are doing some YouTube videos now, and what is it, like a 10-minute video about partial fills, and it's something that didn't really click until I listened to it. It's like, well, damn, like that is the biggest indicator that you found the market entry number. That's it. I mean, it's it. You've done it. Aces, good for you. You found the spot. And I mean, it's the same way. If you can't get down at the number you want for the amount you want, that's the number. That's the peak. That's the pinnacle. That's where it's going to tip the other direction. And you've done it. Like that's the ultimate indicator of maybe, everyone argue, oh, CLV and ROI and then this, like maybe the ultimate indicator of success is I can't get enough damn money down.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to, if you're taking sports betting seriously, you have to take any positive mental reassurance you can whenever you can get it, because Lord knows it's going to beat the crap out of you mentally every opportunity it gets. So whether it's CLV and tracking that, and that gives you the mental reassurance, or it's the fact that, you found that really offline number that no one else seemed to have found and you hit it. You didn't get, you only had like a small amount on, but you did get some. All these little things are sort of that sort of positive reinforcement that you're on the right track. But yeah, I consistently found that, so that everyone's got different tastes. I really enjoy Shepard Seville podcasts.
Oh yeah.
Like they're longer even than mine,
which
is definitely something.
Well, the one with Hagren is 4 hours. And he's built his own outline.
Yeah.
And there's definitely things in them that I'm just like screaming, like I disagree. But that's the beauty. I love content in a way that gets me thinking and that gives me an opinion. But one of the, I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Chatham, is it? Guy bet basketball, and he called it Blue Circle Wars, didn't he, on Pinnacle? So suddenly I've still got a number that I think is value. Pinnacle are at max limits. I'm hitting the number, and it's bouncing back and forth, and it bounces back to where I think it's a positive EV, and I'm hitting it, and it's like, you know, if you're in that war, there's a danger that, you know, you're the loser and you don't realize it yet. And while there are definitely people who are playing at that sharp end of the market, who are churning over a small margin, you know, and they are able to compete in those things, I just seen it, you know, at syndicate level, bookmaker level, all these at personal punting level, all the rest of it. I definitely have seen the point where you just can't ignore too good to be true. You know, it's like the idea that if you can get 20%, you know, if someone says, you know, you've got 20% EV on NFL sides, well, it's not only that you don't have 20% EV, you've probably got negative EV. Like it goes all the way around. It's like if it's that big, you not only don't have that much EV, it's almost a reverse market indicator that you're probably really fucking it up.
Yeah.
And I think that people need to sort of look like. So I had people actually seeing people who stake, so they know that their EV on a market, let's say it's 3%, and they don't start staking until like 2%, and the stake goes up 3% and 3.5% difference to the market. That's sort of their max stake, and then the stake trails off, and then there's just a shut off because they know that there's no way the market. It's like I always think, like there's a bookmaker who's betting, like let's call -110, let's call that 105, right? So the bookmaker feels that 5% is enough protection. Sorry, 5% implied probability. You know, that's what they feel like. So what is the chance in a developed market that if you were the bookmaker and the bookmaker was betting with you, that you would be better by more than what the bookmaker bets to? You know, if you think of it as sort of this 95 to 105, the implied probability is somewhere between 95% and 105%. And the idea that you're going to like be in at 70% or whatever, like you're that much better. It's like, when you think about the funny thing about like juice in general, size of margin to me is interesting in and of itself, because essentially margin is designed to protect the deviation between opening and closing. So if we think, and like, so I remember looking at like EPL, so really liquid, like the three-way money line market, if you like, for EPL, average, data sets I looked at, it's like average juice was like 103.8% or something like that. And I measured the implied probability deviation across this massive sample size between the opening and closing. And the deviation is actually a shade over 3.8%, the average deviation, which for starters, for incredibly liquid, like accurate market, that's a big deviation, right? But on top of that, it's like that deviation on that huge sort of average, it just so happens that the margin is very similar to the deviation. So in other words, if you were caught with your pants down at the top of the market and it settled at the bottom of the market, essentially, especially if you took less at the opening of the market and taking more at the bottom of the market, you know, you've come out flat, like you've probably laid to 100% book kind of thing.
Okay. You
know, and that margin indicator should be an indicator to you of like how much you can beat them by, in my mind. And when people say, the funny thing is people say like, oh, how can you beat these markets? Like now if it's like a national lottery operator, like operating like -130 or whatever, both sides, yeah, I get that. But generally the idea that bigger margin is like, just think of the margin as an indicator of volatility. How much volatility there's in open and closing. It's like, you've got to get into futures. You've got to be betting so much more in futures. You cannot be thinking about the theoretical hold on futures as being an obstacle. You've got to think about the open and closing deviation. All you've got to do is you've got to be getting volatility ahead of what the market has priced the volatility in for. And futures is where there is massive volatility. You know, so much of the professional golf business that I'm involved with or whatever betting, it's outrights, it's futures. It's so crazy to see a market that's so developed in the US facing, that's all around matchups. And I've got people so I see them, they're turning over like billions to the US offshore market and the PPHs on golf matchups.
Sure.
And then they're not having a dime on futures. And then meanwhile in Europe, you've got people turning over billions on outright futures and not a single dime on like the match bets. or like they may just like have a token bit of action on the sides at all. It's like a small part of the portfolio, but it's different ways of looking. But like I would say to people, initially seeing margin should not be our obstacle. And the great thing is esports, so we have this anchoring bias. So it's like, what do you bet two-way to? Oh, well, I mean, ATP tennis or whatever, like 105, like, oh, it's esports though, right? I mean, what the fuck do we know about it? Okay, 107? Like, I don't know, we're pretty shit, you know, like, okay, 110, we'll go 110, fine. No way we can be 10%. And they're anchored to what they think two-way market should be.
Sure.
Your knowledge of esports may be so bad and the deviation between open and close may be so large, the realistic margin should be 120. But you don't realize it. You cannot get to the point where you're that shit at League of Legends that you're like, so when people say like, oh, you know, I would bet esports, but I can't beat like 110 on CSGO. To me, it's just like,
no, that's where you should be trying to attack them because they're bad at making that number. Yeah.
Table tennis, it's like treat margin as a measure of fear and go after them. When you see the fear, that is like, and like if you want, you can take a lot of opening and closes.
Like live betting, and it's completely different. You know how we view live in play on this side of the pond, where it's massive. You know, it's almost feels like I almost feel like some European people like they look down on pre-match. Where, you know, their limit, you know, limits are a lot bigger at pre-match and people are actually getting money down. But it seems like everybody is just, well, why wouldn't you play in play? Like you have more information and you see that, like you say the fear. Well, that's why in play is -20 on both sides, or at least -15 everywhere. It's just, well, they can't adjust quick enough and they don't know what they're doing. They don't have the time to have a trader sitting there and adjusting fast enough to some of these sports. And that's why I think a lot of people take advantage of in play. And the same thing with the esports. You see some big vig on some of these esports lines and some of these books. It's like, well, first off, they're probably just copying. And then second off, they're not even confident in the copying. They're not confident in the person who they're stealing the lines from. And you do see some people pretty successful and they're saying, you know, and they're betting anything, you know, that's like, hey, that's -400. It should be a -1,000. You should lay it heavy on that. Like juice doesn't matter. Big underdogs come through all the time. Like esports lines are kind of shit. And it's wild because it is a little new and they had a chance this summer to develop that market a little, and you still see wild results. And you know, the few people I know that are into that market, like they're certainly not scared off by the margins.
I mean, the thing about, I mean, esports, I mean, another great example, I mean, Drew loves this, is ITF. Bet it to 112, bet it to 115. Fuck, I've seen people who bet into 112 ITF with 20% ROIs over like thousands of bets.
Sure.
It's like, do you know what I did a study of ITF.
It's all price discovery there.
I did ITF, right? Bria scores, so you know, measure of predictive accuracy, if you like, over like 100,000 ITF matches, opening to closing. Do you know what was crazy? It was barely more accurate than flipping coins, barely. And you know what was also crazy is that the closing line was almost the same as the opening.
Wow.
So they didn't even get the pricing, they didn't even get the money information into the price.
Wow.
That is how fucked up it was. And like, and you know what the funny thing is that you think to yourself, what would the bookmaker love to see? Oh, I bet they'd love to see people doing, you know, 4-fold, 5-fold parlays into 112 markets. Do you know what? Taking 4-fold, 5-fold parlays when you've got a -20% EV, that's probably not what they want to be seeing, but they don't know it yet.
Sure.
Well, you know what's crazy?
It's just it's so illiquid. I mean, if there ever was an ITF market that was suddenly very liquid and a lot of information was flowing into it, the tennis integrity unit would have to be on it because you know there's some sort of fixes in, you know, these markets. Is it just that? Is there's not enough information to get the
plus
price
they put
discovery?
they put the intern in charge of trading that market.
No, well, I mean, for starters, how many originators are there in ITF tennis?
Yeah, 3, 4.
Not many. And how many times have we got the blind leading the blind? You know,
Often.
We've got people just following stuff. And you know, to impart betting information into your pricing, you know, you need to have ownership of your pricing, right?
Sure.
Or you've got to build a complex solution. bookmakers do not like spending money on complex solutions. Absolutely not.
Sure.
So like and the funny thing is, you talk about like the liquidity. Do you know what? I go back to Marco Bloom did a good sample on this on one of the podcasts he was on. Marco keeps a lot close to his chest. I love that.
Those are good podcasts though when he's on.
He's a top class poker player once upon a time, etc. So he's obviously very good at keeping up. But he talked about the great thing. He talked about parlays, and he talked about how you think of a parlay as having larger and larger bets on each leg of the parlay, and how you get volume through multiplication.
Sure.
So people say to me like, "Oh, why would I bother with first quarter totals or ITF or esports or whatever? Just parlay it. You're packaging massive EV multiplied times over. It's like the other thing is, like, if you're watching a screen, the number of times that you'll be in a situation where, if college sports, Andy, you're big college basketball, right? Is that your thing? So you'll be looking at that lower division stuff. You can't tell me that every time you only see one price that you like. Just impossible. There must be times where you look at it and I'm going to bet that and that and that and that. And yeah, you look at it and you think, oh, I'm going to bet that there because it's best price there, that there is best price. Do the calculation, EV calculate. Throw in some slightly negative EV, some neutral EV with the massive EV, so you can get the 4 sections of the parlay at that bookmaker, so that you can put that parlay in. And you need to be confident, because obviously when you start putting in slight neutral EV or negative EV, you get a slight tricky thing. Alternatively, you can just leap to something where you can almost price in the EV easily. So if you want to throw in a -3 NFL game, you kind of already know, close to kickoff, you kind of already know really what the approximate negative EV might be on that. But you've got 3 other bits. You got to sort of think about, people complaining oh, I wouldn't use that book because the limits are so low, whatever, like that. Just make your own limits. Parlays mean you make your own limits. Just check the max payout. And I see behind the scenes, I see shit that literally would fucking melt some people's minds. Some of this esports, some of the esports, I saw people do 12-fold parlays. So there's some esports tournament, and it bet every single match in a parlay on the opening round. Didn't realize, I forget what we didn't realize. Didn't realize something stupid, whatever it was, player was dead or something completely ridiculous that you had to sort of follow the forums to know. And yeah, just absolutely obliterated it. And the first time you realize you've been obliterated is when you fucking open the ledger and see that bomb has exploded in your book, And a lot of people get angry at that stuff, but I fucking love it. When I see that, I'm just like, you fucking got it right.
Yeah, of course. But bottom line, who cares though? Because you're gonna take so much action on the super efficient NFL or the EPL or whatever. That's really where you're making the money. The rest of this stuff is just funny. It's just customer acquisition.
This really hit home too, because after last year, and all my college basketball for the most part was pretty public, and someone reached out and he said, "Hey, I ran your stuff, pretty plus EV stuff." He's like, "Do you know if you would have parlayed your picks, even at the closing number, every single day that you had at least 2, you would have had an extra 50% ROI on top of what you made, on top of what you made." And then I said, and I went and looked at it, and I'm like, that is amazing. And then of course I didn't do it. And then a couple weeks ago, I had a 4-0 day followed by a 5-0 day. None of them were even close as far as the closing numbers. The parlays on those 2 take care of the whole year. You could have done it again this year. And it bothers me a lot now.
Andy, I got to ask, did you sort of hate that guy? I know he's trying to be nice. Did you sort of
he's helped me with some other stuff, so I can't hate him,
you often need perspective from the outside for these sort of things.
It helps, yes.
Think about the Mexican baseball that came through, Andy, that we got from our friend. If you're not originating it, but you see something small market comes through that is just absolutely crushing, just like Matt's saying, you're like, well, I can't get a ton down on this, but I can parlay these. Like, no, you know it's plus EV.
Or even just parlaying it with neutral EV stuff. If you can find stuff that's just neutral with the VIG and parlay it with everything, if and or buts. And
if you're originating your own college basketball, though, maybe you're a little uncertain. You're like, yeah, my EV is positive, but how big is it really? Do I really want to mix in some coin flips and some minus EV with that? No, I'm not going to get greedy. I'm just going to take what I want. Single play these. But yeah, no,
that's where the mental aspect. It's like what Matthew was saying with the blue circle wars. Like that has to keep a guy up at night. It doesn't matter how sure of yourself, how back tested and how positive you are, or how much money you have. If you're maxing something at a very liquid book at a very liquid market and it's bouncing right back at you, you're not just sitting and clicking that as fast as you can again. Like nobody is ever. You have to sit and think about that for a couple seconds. Certainly, there's some doubt in your mind on something like that.
We have a mutual friend who's a baseball bettor. And he told us at one point in the thick of just a season where he was getting down just insane liquidity, that he would put his baseball action in. He would make his prices. He'd be like, okay, this one's off by 8 cents. This one's off by 9 cents. This one's off by 12 cents. This one's off by 15 cents. Give those numbers to his guys, and they would just paint every out they had, right? And he's saying, okay, 9 out of 10 times. The number would move 8 or 9 cents in the first swing. So we would only get that one bet in, kind of like your partial fills concept, right? Like he's not getting as much down as he would really hope to get down on every one of these bets because they're just limited by what liquidity they have. But then 1 out of every 10, the number would come back, and they knew there was someone on the other side that had basically 12 cents in the other direction this should be going, and they had multiple cracks at that. And he said it's a mental game, because you realize that if 10% of your plays, you're going to have 10x or more the stake possibilities, because you're going up against someone who's equally confident and is getting equal market signal on their bets and is like, no, my numbers are right, I'm right, and he said that you have this tiny subset of plays that end up deciding your season. And that's mind-blowing to me. That's mind-blowing. I cannot imagine sitting through those ones where it's like, okay, well, we have 1, 1, 1, 1, and then 50. It's like, what? Like, that's not a good way to do this. And but if you win more than 50% of those, or you do that once, you figure out like, okay, who's on the other side of this? Let's vig free cross next time, and then then you only have to beat that other sharp player 6 out of 10 times you play them, or 55% of the time over the course of the season if you have that many crosses.
The greatest validation for the partial fill thing for me is having worked a little bit in some money moving type brokerage stuff. Cross matching. Do you know what happened with cross matching? Is everyone went home hungry. You get a few hot syndicates who are really fucking good at what they do. You submit the cross matching, they get their fills back, and they'd be like, that's the one I didn't really feel that strong on. Great, I got max filled on that. Oh, the one I really liked, nothing on that, nothing on that, nothing on that. And the funny thing is, the other guy's there, and he should be thinking, oh yeah, I got max filled on the thing that guy hates, but he's there going, oh, it just fucking doesn't work for me. This, it's like, and someone said, I can't remember who it was, some politician I think, but said like the best negotiations, business negotiations, are the ones where both people go home angry. Yeah. and it's like, you've got to remember. Do you know the guy who fucking loves cross matching? It's the guy who gets to see the matching.
Yes.
Because he's suddenly got the best fucking price on the planet sat in front of him. Like, right. So these guys, if I average these two people, that is the fucking number. And I'm going to go bet the shit out of it over here. So, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think whenever I hear people talking about indulging in some cross matching, I just think, I hope you're good. I hope you're good, because it is tough. Two people cross matching is like tough game. Yeah. Because you submit it blind, because otherwise it's not fair, right? So you're both submitting what you want blind at what price.
I had a fun story.
So it's like if you ever really get into auction theory, it's like auctions are brilliant. Blind auctions are like the best. There's like recently gave a Nobel Prize to a guy for it. Like the best way for the person selling to sell anything is blind auction. So the buyers in blind auctions come off always slightly worse than the sellers. It's like, so if ever you were like a government, like if you were the federal government and you wanted to auction off like huge swathes of federal property, blind auction would be the way you got the taxpayer the most money. That's the like optimal way. And cross matching, you're entering into being the buyer in a blind auction, and you almost can't get the best end of the deal. It's very hard.
It's almost like both people are the buyer in that situation. And like in your situation with the auctions, like the seller had the advantage. He doesn't have the competition. Essentially, there might be other auctions, I guess, but all those buyers, they have what if it's some sort of cognitive bias or just something like they're overthinking, and there's a bit of game theory, like they have to outbid someone else, where the seller is just like, this is my price. This is my blind price, and whoever can meet it will get it. So it is almost kind of funny that you turn them both into buyers at that point. And you see that a lot. You see crosses that just don't get filled. Like, somebody says, we got offered this, we got offered that, and it never happens.
Yeah, they can't see the resistance point.
Sure.
Because you have to say, so it's like when you see an art auction, like million, $1,000,000, $1,200,000, $1,300,000, $1,400,000, like both of those people in the bidding have what they think is the true price.
Reserve price, sure. Yeah.
And both of them in their head, they have almost certainly overestimated the maximum price it's worth. And it's true, like when people estimate their edge, it's like, it was actually Bet the Process, the Shane Sisby recent one, where they're talking about things over moving. Number of fucking time things over move. It's just because the guy smashing into it with his incredible model says like, this is like minus 130, and it's like, I bet it, and it's minus 120. Fucking, you move to my fucking number, bitch. I'm going to bet the minus. That's where it should be, and it's gone there. And it's like, look over every single one of the times that you made something minus 130 and the market was minus 110. Did you capture that 20? Did you capture all of it? Is your EV line up? Does your ROI line up with your EV estimation?
Never.
Because I just, I've seen really, there are probably people out there whose like ROI and EV do line up, but for the vast majority of people, it's very hard to capture your whole EV. In fact, if someone told me they were capturing 50% of their EV, I'd be like, great job. You are doing great. It's like, I've seen people like who are betting, really high level soccer stuff, and they're betting into like Asian market, not so much now. Asian market's getting a little wide, but once upon a time, like 102, and they'd be like making like 1%. And it's like, yeah, so if you're splitting the difference, if you're getting 1% when it's priced to 102, you're doing a good job. That is a good job. And it's hard for people to sort of, don't be discouraged. Like if your closing line value and it's like when people look at their closing line value and compare like, oh, my closing line value over like the last 2,000 bets I should be a millionaire, but I've only got 50 grand. It's like, don't feel bad about that. That's, you're already in a very exclusive club by making money and having closing line value. So,
Okay. Well, I want to go back to one real quick point that you brought up about the ITF, and specifically when it comes to the unknown and price discovery specifically in markets. And it's rare that it happens for sure at the beginning of any given, major sporting season in the US where, there's some true uncertainty. How is this coach going to operate this team? How do these players develop in the off season? How is this new quarterback going to fit into this role? Is he going to thrive or is he going to shrink? There's for sure uncertainty, and there for sure is volatility and price discovery in the first couple of weeks that you start to get new, data and games and information. And then there's some like outlier crazy price discovery cases like Iga Swiatek at the French Open sort of stuff. Like how as a trader, how as a bookmaker do you handle something like that where you have someone kind of come out of nowhere and play at a level that you just aren't sure is repeatable, and it takes you the entire tournament. You never win a bet. You never have a winning book against Iga Swiatek because you cannot, find the true price. And is that just like such a one-off, such a unique scenario that it's not really worth worrying about?
Or the Heat Celtics series I always bring up, where it's like,
sure.
Just how the NBA playoffs are booked. It doesn't matter how good the Heat have been playing and how bad they beat the Celtics in this game. They can't adjust the line to where they probably should.
It's anchored in the wrong place.
It has to be, the starting anchor was in the wrong place. You can't go flying off the handle when maybe you should.
Right. So let's assume we work in a world where, people actually do engage in any sort of price discovery or any sort of actual handicapping of any sort, which is not necessarily a given. Because part of the problem is that if you stifle true price discovery, you will always never get to the correct closing lines. If you don't get to the correct closing lines, you can't update your perception of where things are. There's no doubt that if something closes at, let's say something closes at -7, and somehow the industry has stifled getting to the -14 it should have been, when that team wins by 21, there's still kind of this perception that no, the -7 could still be right.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
So they, without efficient price discovery globally, you hold back everyone's ability to come up with a good evaluation. But okay, let's say if you did it really well, if everything was functioning the way it should be. So the French Open example, one thing that the bookmaker always has an advantage in a way, almost the laziness pays, because if you basically just someone wins in a convincing fashion, really impressive, the easiest thing to do is just nudge them up one. There's whatever your arbitrary rating ranking is. Oh, up one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to give them something. And the great thing is you go up one. And the thing is that if we assume that on average across the planet, excessive outlier performance is hard to maintain and it regresses, then by just incrementing one, but bookmakers by bettors in their heads think it's gone up 10, you eventually catch them. So you'd see in these classic tennis matches are brilliant in this, the tournament structure. So you get bang, a massive young, so what was it? It was, Coco Gauff, for example, with Wimbledon, she had that run. She's a great narrative, fabulous story, lovely person, comes across great. Everyone wants to buy into that journey. They're betting almost because they want to be part of the Coco Club, right? It's feels good to bet on someone who you like, the sort of the full narrative, and it's a big liquid market. So that happens. The next match comes along, take a load of bets, and you've seen Coco play, and you're like, oh, it's not bad. Up one. People come in, bang, take their winnings. They're like, fuck, they love it. Not only am I part of the Coco Club, but I also got paid. Right, next round of matches come on, and so the bookmaker's just praying to basically average in, eventually to the point where we lost 10 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand, won 100 grand, and hopefully it will cover all the rounds before it, kind of thing. So
it usually does, right?
Averaging. Well, the thing that I got taught, and when sort of I was being told actually how to come up with being an odds compiler, a handicap to come up with a number, was to understand, and they called this, and this was something that comes out strongly if you trade live. So my background originally in the UK in the early noughties in spread betting. We were the first people to do sort of fairly complex live markets, really. And you had to understand the power of what we would call the rebase, they would call it. So your original number, your prior, is garbage. We've seen the first 40 minutes or whatever we're watching, and it's quite clear that nudging up one.
That happens in the NBA about 1 out of 5 games. Go ahead.
Up one is not going to fucking cut it. So now it's kind of and the thing is that you need the mindset. So the temptation is to go, or maybe it's up 10. No, that's the worst thing that you can do. Thinking going up one's not cutting it, and never really rethinking the prior and just thinking, well, I'll go up 5, up 10. That's how you overshoot as a bookmaker, and people beat you back the other way. What you've got to do is you've almost got to stop, pause time, look at the original number, and it may be that the next move you make is up 13.8, whatever your metric is, but then that's your new starting point, and then you're back to up one, up one, up one. You can't be going 5, 5, 5, 5, because you just overshoot and you fuck yourself. So you want to be going back, reestablishing the prior, the original rating. I remember one of the earliest games I watched. You guys familiar with what rugby league even is?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think even some of you bet on some Australian NRL, didn't you, at some point? Yeah.
I've rugby and Aussie rules football. Those are fun because
AFL's great.
AFL is fun.
You will have watched rugby league, and it's a physically demanding game. Not only is it heavy contact, but there's no real long pauses in play. So aerobically, you run a lot, and also you get hit by large men a lot. Not a great combination from my view, but there you go. And I remember watching in early noughties, it was a rugby league game in the UK, and we saw some very late, let's call it the hottest of the hot, sharp action. And they were backing this team to cover, and they were coming back, and they were just like, literally, they had almost infinite appetite. So it's almost like it was the equivalent of a game going from -3 to -40 in the NFL. That is how big. And it transpired that one team had sent basically their kids. And when we used to joke about like kids means people in their low 20s. No, there were kids. There were 18. There were actual
17-year-old under 18 team.
The Russian soccer match. It reminds me of that.
And they were playing basically their best possible, the absolute elite versus these kids. And the worst part about it is I remember watching the guy trade it, and the kids like held their own for like the first 20 minutes.
Again, like that Russian soccer.
The worst thing that could have happened, because when you're 18, running for 80 minutes while getting hit by a man double your body weight, that takes its toll, and you're making a lot of you're constantly on the defense, so you're getting hit again and again and again. And like the score was like they won by 70 or something. It was just absolutely ridiculous, the most ridiculous game I'd ever seen at the time. And so, like, if you don't have the capacity to rebase that number, and the thing is that it's the sunk cost, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Because the moment you rebase 30 points away from your original, it's basically like paying out all those tickets already.
Yeah. It's like we've graded those winners. Those are winners. We're
you
new
almost
market,
want to be able to reset your order book, like reset all the bets you take, and so just give me a blank canvas. That nasty book will settle that when we fucking have to settle it. But right now, blank canvas, what would I be now that I know that there's 18-year-old kids playing in this game? So, that is like the real skill. And that's what made live trading, like you guys will have, a lot of the US content talks about, quite rightly, the softness of halftime numbers, right? A lot of people want to bet very quickly into halftime numbers in college sports, in American football, etc., like that. And it's because so many of these situations will require a potential rebase. Maybe not a huge one, but there'll be a scenario whereby the prior has assumed that on average, all these things meet this line. And you watch the plays and suddenly you're like, the average is meaningless now because we're all playing up here on this line, this medium, there's like the lower 2 standard deviations below the average 2. And it's like, the average is, it's like if someone said to you, what's the average of binary code? You'd say a half. And yet it never lands on a half, right? It can only be 0 or 1. And it's like the average performances of sports teams and metrics and things like that. They often have some sort of average. But the reality is that when you actually see the game play out, you can quite quickly go to 0 or 1 when you see, oh, right. Yeah, that guy can't catch the ball. Fuck. Okay. And it's not like up 1. It's like, no, the guy can't catch. He's shit, or like, yeah, he's getting sacked 3 times or whatever, or the weather really is that bad, whatever it is. And these mental
game.
What's incredible is with all this complexity of live, Andy, the live limits are much higher in UK and Europe than they are pre-match. You can have much larger bets at Bet365 live than you can pre-match.
Wow.
And it's because the margins are so much better. They make so much money because in live environment, it's harder to price compare. So it's harder to pick someone off.
You can't price shop that. You'd have to slow down time to price shop.
Well, but people do. Good screens are price shopping. Because like you can price shop with soccer quite nicely because the time decay with the ball's in the middle of the pitch, you can kind of price shop. Like it's sort of like, and or potentially price shop in between plays and it can be done. But anyway. But yeah, generally it's hard for like most people to line shop during live, and it's a more emotional state. Oh my God, he almost scored! It's the more emotional state. It's the perfect environment to take bets. It's like 3 drinks in round the roulette wheel. It's like so that's when people say why do people care?
City goes down to some shit team, Sheffield. Sheffield knocks a early one in, lucky. And I mean, where the live money's coming. So all of a sudden the total is, the total is suddenly 3.5, minus 50. And you have to price City at an absurd rate because, just the fact that where all that money's going to come. Like, there's just so many live situations where, as an operator, you just know how the market's going to react so quickly anyway. You would think, like, well, there's your margin. Like, all you punters are going, like, you aren't taking any Sheffield money up on nothing.
But this is where the real challenge is that City, go 1-0 up, and you're expecting to see a flood of tickets come in, City over goals, over City goals, City to cover handicap, blah 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 blah, correct score 6-0, all of it, and then suddenly you see that one fucking bomb come in, and they're backing like City minus 2.75, and you're like, shit, didn't think that guy would be playing that or that way. And then you're thinking, what did I miss? And like, you're looking at like the body language of the Sheffield players, and it's like, oh, they're shit. They are already relegated, and maybe they just, oh fuck, did I call? And then we're in rebase territory again. That's a bit like one I loved. This was great watching the bet ticker flow. Was USA women soccer against Thailand.
Oh man,
fuck,
that was unbelievable.
There's no one thinks like. No one sits there thinking, you know what, this handicap should be 9 goals. Everyone just kind of like, well.
I think we did think that though.
Well, but like fun with that tournament. Yeah.
When you're a bookmaker, like you kind of try to think, do you know what? Maybe USA will just like score 3, and then they'll let
just call off the dogs. Yeah, right.
They'll let the girls will let their friends play for the next half or something like that. I don't know, what'll happen or something like that. And so they're just kind of like. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it certainly wasn't 11 goal handicap, right, or whatever it was. So like, and there was this moment, and like, it's almost a danger if the goals are really evenly spaced, because it's like basically sleeping in a smoke-filled room and you don't realize you're dying. It's like, 10 minutes in, first goal, 20 minutes in, second goal, 28 minutes, third goal. And you don't realize you're just sleepwalking towards your death. And the funny thing is that in that moment, the guys who just are like low stakers, they're all like, fucking idiot bookmaker. This is going to be like 40-0. And the great thing is that there's also the sharp as fuck guy who's going, idiot fucking bookmaker. This is going to be 40-0. And so you get hit by both of these lumps. And it kind of gets all filtered in, and you're like, oh, I've suddenly got a huge position here, and I'm sure it's just mostly small tickets, and like this is the test of a bookmaker, how good their bet monitoring is, and how good they're like, because you can just like suddenly realize. And the funny thing is that you're there taking bets at like minus 9.5, and you think I've averaged in pretty well here. There's no way there's 10 goals. Like fuck, it's incredible, and it's one of these things that like it's really tragic, but. It's almost like a really shit computer game. I'd love everyone to play because it can be quite fun. It's like, I remember watching that. It's shit film, but it's a great film. It's got Billy Bob Thornton and Angela Jolie, I think, and Pushing Tin. And basically it's about air traffic control guys, right? That's like classic shit late night movie for me.
Yeah.
And
that's not where I thought you were going.
And I looked at that, and I went to school with a guy who straight out of school at 18, all he wanted to do was be flight control. That's all he wanted to do. And flight control in the UK, like the tests are like, it's like trying to get into Goldman Sachs, only like for Mensa, it's fucking brutal. And they make you play these games that are like, these are really intense, like migraine giving games, basically. And the consequence of you fucking up is a load of people crash and die. And it's like one of those things where, I don't want to do that for a job, but it would be interesting to do that like as a game exercise. And
sure.
I would love to get loads of people like to trade. You'd have to pick games that like no one really could remember the result from, that had ridiculous score lines in it. And like, try and get them like, okay, so we're going to replay the bet data, all the bets that were struck and the prices, and you've now got to trade this as you see it. Almost like a training simulator, but with historical data. I would. It's tragic. Like no one else would want to play this game at all. But for me, it'd be like
just pick some random SEC college football stuff with Alabama scoring 30 or 40 points in the first half and no score in the second half, and watch people pull their hair out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that women's match too. Like you said, the spacing of those goals, like the time decay is the time decay, and you have to set, certain, like your baseline. You have certain expectations of how soccer works, and they weren't close enough together where people was like, well, just if you're just going to keep hanging these numbers and using normal time decay and using normal advancements on the total, you're just gonna, like you said, you just probably got drowned.
And the thing is that also you kind of, I mean, that was so brilliant. It's like you expected some humanity from the USA, didn't you? You expected some sort of sisterhood at some point.
I kind of did. I thought they were just. I thought they were going to let up after like 6.
I was one of those people smashing USA the whole time, because you got the sense that they were they were still celebrating so hard after like goal 7, just like woo, yes, jumping, and then they bring in the subs who hadn't scored. As good. They hadn't scored in like a bunch of international matches, and you're like, okay, well, now they want to get theirs. Like, this is obviously like everybody's get right game. Like this is the confidence builder. Like they are going to get as many as they possibly freaking can. They do not care about promoting the growth of women's soccer in Thailand. They give zero Fs about this. They are going to bury them alive. And that was fun. That was a fun one. Anyway. All right. Well, we've taken up enough of your time. This has been a great conversation. We for sure will try to have you back on this off season as talk a little bit more about industry stuff. See where I guess, what do you see the future taking you here in the space over the next couple months? Are you going to be doing more content? I've absolutely loved all the videos and podcasts I've seen and heard you produce. Every time we talk to you or I hear from you, different light bulbs are going off and helping me kind of think better about the space. So thank you for that. Where can people find your stuff?
Well, I'm back on Twitter, having been off for a while, and I'm putting content out where I've done like a couple of YouTube videos, and still got my Medium blog, got some bits on it, still got the podcast, which is Anchor, but also available on iTunes, other places. SoundCloud, I didn't pay for the premium SoundCloud, so I think there's one episode on there, which is what you're allowed. But yeah, don't worry about that. And in terms of content, I'd love to put out more content, but I'm lazy and also never really sure at any given time what content people would want. I definitely would like to try and do more stuff. It feels a bit bandwagony, but apparently betting's been legalized in the States, so I'm sort of interested. No, I mean, in seriousness, I think that people have the questions I receive from people in the US betting space are different and make me think harder, and they also make me question things. It's really good for me to be opened into that. I mean, I mentioned. I mean, I'll leave it up to Drew whether he wants to mention it later or not. But I've been listening to this podcast about guy working in the PPH industry. It's good. I love it. Like I had researched, I'd investigated this quite a lot over the last few years myself, but just hearing some of the stuff on it, I love hearing about, any different geographical location. One thing that, I think US content creators are adamant about, and very correctly, is USA is different, but so is Russia. So is the Australian market. Australia, no live. Russian market, tennis volume in Russia is absolutely through the roof. It's phenomenal. Everyone's got these geographical personalities, different norms. Just the fact that you see, odds appear in different fashions suggests this. And I think they should be embraced and celebrated and encouraged, these variations. And I also think that, I would think that it'll reap great dividends if the industry recognizes the importance of embracing the diversity of people, and to suggest that the US hasn't figured out how to do certain things right. They got some stuff right. I mean, your barbecue is pretty good for starters, but but no, seriously, it's like I think there is I would love to do some sort of more content looking at the US, but I need people to feed me information, things they want to see, things they want to hear. And to be honest, because I'm so lazy, what I really need is you to just get me back on, having sourced all the questions for me, ask me the questions, and then it's just easy stuff. But yeah, I think definitely, I'm going to be just going to see how it goes, and hopefully I can stay on Twitter without losing my mind, But I can't give any.
It's not easy.
It's a delicate art.
It is an art.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap. Thank you again, Matthew Trenhaile, of course, industry insider.
What is your Twitter account? Just in case some people want to bug you, or by bug you, I mean ask you a really good question that you could turn into content.
It is. God, I don't even remember. At 10star_trench.
10-star trench. I like it. All right. Well, Matthew, thank you as always, and we will looking forward to having you back on and doing another one of these chats. And best of luck in your endeavors over across the pond.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Set the music. All right. Good job. Nice work.
I don't get to listen to the music in the morning that often. This is nice. Very pleasing.
Yeah, we should just download the video and we'll just post it. Can we post it to play? We can post it to play at the normal time, right? So people can watch it live.
Yes.
You know how to do that?
I'll figure it out.